Just a leech, Dad. You always have been. My son said that to me on Thanksgiving morning. The same morning I was standing at his stove, making the cornbread stuffing his mother used to make. The same recipe she taught me 40 years ago in a kitchen smaller than his mudroom. I set down the wooden spoon, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and walked out of that house without saying a word. By noon, I had frozen every card he'd ever been added to. By evening, I had canceled the family cruise I'd booked for Christmas. 14 days in the Caribbean, $31,000 on my visa. And then I did something none of them saw coming. Something I barely saw coming myself. Let me back up. My name is Eugene. I'm 67 years old, retired after 32 years as a civil engineer with the county, widowed 4 years ago when Sandra lost her fight with pancreatic cancer in 19 weeks flat. 19 weeks from diagnosis to the day I stood in a cemetery in November, wearing the wrong coat because I couldn't remember how to dress myself without her telling me what the weather was going to do. After Sandra died, my son Marcus and his wife Tiffany invited me to move in with them. They had the space, a 4-bedroom colonial in Cary, North Carolina, that I had helped them purchase. Help them is generous. I put up $47,000 for the down payment and co-signed the mortgage because Marcus had 2 late payments on his credit and the bank wouldn't touch him without a stronger signature on the paperwork. He promised it was temporary. He'd refinance in a year, get my name off the loan, give me back the down payment when they had the equity for it. That was 3 years ago. I moved into their guest room with 2 suitcases and Maria's photograph on the nightstand. I told myself it was temporary for me too. Just until I found my footing without Sandra. Just until the grief got quieter. It never really got quieter, but I got better at carrying it. I cooked most nights because Tiffany worked late and Marcus coached his son's travel soccer. I watched their youngest, Brianna, on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons when her daycare closed early. I mowed the lawn every Saturday and handled the pest control, because Marcus kept forgetting to schedule it, and the previous summer they'd had a carpenter ant situation in the garage that cost $800 to fix. I paid for that too. The pest control visits every quarter, the lawn service in the weeks my back wouldn't let me push the mower myself. Little things. The kind of things that don't feel like much until you add them up. I should have been adding them up. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Marcus came home late and distracted, the way he gets when something is eating at him and he doesn't want to say it directly. I was in the kitchen making a grocery list. Turkey, butter, fresh sage, celery, the particular brand of chicken stock Sandra always used. I had a whole plan for the meal. It was going to be good. "We need to talk about something," he said, not sitting down, just standing in the doorway with his jacket still on like he might need to leave again quickly. "Tiffany and I have been talking about the living situation." I put down my pen. "It's not working," he said. "Having you here. It was supposed to be short-term, and it's been 3 years, and it's just a lot, Dad. It's a lot on us." I asked him what specifically was a lot. I kept my voice even. I've had a lot of practice keeping my voice even. "Everything," he said, and I could see him casting around for something that didn't sound as bad as what he meant. "The space, the routine, the kids are getting older and they need." "I watch your kids twice a week," I said. "I cook dinner 4 nights out of 7. I handle the yard." "I know, and we appreciate that, but..." "Do you?" "Because I'm not sure you've ever said that." He shifted his weight and looked at the floor the way he used to do at 16 when he'd broken curfew and was trying to figure out the angle. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I'm asking a question. "You're a leech, Dad." The words came out sharp, like he'd been holding them a long time and they'd developed an edge waiting. "You always have been. Even with Mom. She carried you emotionally for 30 years and now you're here and we're supposed to, what, just absorb you?" I heard Tiffany at the top of the stairs. I didn't look up to see if she was listening or if she'd heard, but I knew from the silence that she had. The particular silence of someone who has stopped moving. I picked up my pen. I added cranberries to the list. Then I folded the paper, put it in my shirt pocket, and went upstairs to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time with my hands on my knees. The photograph of Sandra looked back at me from the nightstand. She had this expression in that photo, half smiling at something just out of frame. And for the first time since I put it there, I didn't find it comforting. I found it clarifying. She would have had something to say about this. She would have said it calmly, with a precision that left no room for argument. She always could. I used to say she carried me emotionally, and I meant it as a compliment, as evidence of how much I needed her, how much she gave. It never occurred to me that my son had heard that and filed it away as a character flaw. I slept badly. In the morning, I was up at 5:30, which is when I always wake up, and I went down to the kitchen and started the cornbread for the stuffing because Thanksgiving was the next day and someone had to get it started. Old habit. Force of movement. Marcus came down around 9. He didn't acknowledge the conversation from the night before. Didn't apologize. Poured his coffee and looked at his phone and asked if I'd remembered to get the good turkey this year. The heritage breed from the farm stand on 55. Not the grocery store one. I'd driven out there 3 weeks earlier and put down a deposit. Yeah, I said. I remembered. He nodded and went back to his phone, and that was it. Like he hadn't looked me in the eye 15 hours ago and told me I was a leech. Like the word hadn't landed where it landed. I finished the cornbread. I put it in the oven. I watched it to the glass door, and I thought about Sandra, and about the down payment, and about the 19 Tuesday and Thursday afternoons I'd sat with Brianna doing puzzle after puzzle after puzzle, because she loved puzzles, and nobody else had the patience for them. I thought about the $31,000 cruise I'd booked in September, wanting to give the whole family something good, something we could all point to and say we did that together. I thought about what it meant that my name was still on that mortgage. Then I took out my phone, and I called my bank. I have 2 credit cards, one that's been in my name for 25 years, one I opened after Sandra died to manage some of the estate expenses. Marcus was an authorized user on both. Tiffany was on the second one. They used them for what they called household expenses, which I had come to understand meant Marcus's golf outings and Tiffany's membership at a boutique fitness studio in downtown Cary and the occasional DoorDash order at 11 o'clock at night. The woman at the bank was professional and unhurried. I explained that I wanted to remove authorized users from both accounts effective immediately. She asked if there was fraud involved. I said no. She asked if I was certain. I said yes. The whole call took 11 minutes. I thanked her, hung up, and went back to check on the cornbread. An hour later, Tiffany's voice came down the stairs, tighter than usual. Eugene. She only used my name when something was wrong. I was usually Dad, or, when she was in a particularly warm mood, Pop, which I had never loved but never corrected. My card was just declined, she said from the kitchen doorway. She was dressed for some kind of errand, keys in hand, at the gas station. I made some changes to the account. She stared at me. What kind of changes? I removed you and Marcus as authorized users. The silence was the kind that precedes a decision about what register to use. She went with cold and controlled, which is Tiffany's natural register when she feels outmaneuvered. You can't just do that without telling us. I just did. Her jaw tightened. Marcus is going to hear about this. I imagine he will, I said, and went back to my cornbread. Thanksgiving dinner was a strange, stretched-thin affair. My grandkids were oblivious and happy, the way children are when adults are performing normalcy around them. Marcus barely spoke. Tiffany served everything with the exaggerated efficiency of someone doing a task they resent. I ate the food I had cooked, and it was good, and I thought about Sandra at every bite. After the dishes were done, and the kids were watching a movie in the other room, Marcus found me on the back porch. It was cold for November in Carolina, a wet cold that came up off the ground. The card thing, he said. Yes. You're being childish. I made a financial decision about my own accounts. You're punishing us. I looked out at the backyard, at the lawn I'd mowed the previous Saturday, the shed I'd helped him build 2 summers ago. I'm adjusting, I said. Seems like the right time. Because of what I said. He didn't phrase it as an apology, just a statement of cause and effect. Partly, I said, and partly because it was long overdue. He went back inside. I stayed on the porch another 20 minutes, breathing the cold air, listening to the kids laugh at whatever they were watching. I was thinking about the cruise. I went upstairs and opened the cruise line's app on my phone. The reservation was there. King Family Christmas, 14 nights, departing December 21st out of Port Canaveral. 4 cabins, One for me, one for Marcus and Tiffany, one for each set of grandkids. Round-trip airfare to Orlando included, all charged to the card that still had my name on it. I pressed cancel. The app asked me to confirm. I confirmed. There was a cancellation fee. I was inside the final payment window. I lost $400. I considered it the price of clarity. I had one drink from the bottle of bourbon I kept in my room, poured it into the bathroom cup like a man staying in a hotel, and went to sleep at 9:30. I slept like I hadn't slept in months. Friday morning, I called my attorney. His name is Raymond Chu, and he's been handling my affairs since Sandra's estate. Good man. Methodical. When I told him what I wanted to do, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Walk me through what happened." I did. He was quiet again. Then he said, "Okay, come in Monday." I spent the weekend doing what I needed to do. I drove down to the county office and pulled the mortgage documents on the Carey house to understand exactly where I stood on the co-signature. I visited Sandra's sister Paulette in Durham, who I hadn't seen in 8 months, because every time I tried to make plans, something came up, a soccer game, a school event, something that made it inconvenient for me to take the car. Paulette made coffee and we sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours, and I told her almost everything, and she listened the way she always had, with the particular patient attention of someone who has loved you by extension for a very long time. She would be furious, Paulette said about Sandra, meaning at Marcus. She would have already handled it, I said. She wouldn't have let it get this far. Paulette reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. You're handling it now. Monday, I sat across from Raymond in his office on Fayetteville Street, and we went through it all. The down payment, $47,000, documented. The co-signature, which meant I had both legal exposure and legal standing. The credit card charges from the past 2 years, which Raymond suggested I pull as evidence of a pattern. I had not thought about it that way before. I thought about it that way now. What do you want the outcome to be? Raymond asked. I want my name off that mortgage, I said. I want documentation of the down payment as a loan, not a gift with a repayment schedule. I want to not live in that house anymore. Raymond nodded, making notes. The down payment is harder since there was no loan agreement at origination. But there are arguments to make. The mortgage situation is more straightforward. You have the right to request refinancing or to pursue other remedies if they refuse. Draw it up, I said. And the living situation. I'll find somewhere else. That's the easy part. It turned out to be the easy part. I called a real estate agent that same afternoon, a woman named Diane who had sold Sandra and me our first house back in 1989 and was somehow still working and still sharp. She knew what I wanted before I finished describing it. Single-level, manageable yard, enough space for a workshop in the garage. Something mine in every sense. She found it in 11 days. A brick ranch in Apex, 15 minutes from Cary, but a different world in feel. Quiet street, mature trees, a detached garage with good light. The owners had kept everything up carefully. It smelled like fresh paint and old wood, and something about it felt like a beginning. I made an offer the day I walked through it. I told Marcus and Tiffany I was moving out on a Thursday evening. I had chosen Thursday deliberately. Not the beginning of the week when tensions run high. Not the weekend when they might try to make it a prolonged conversation. Thursday, when everyone was tired enough to be honest and not quite geared up for a fight. I sat down at the kitchen table. They sat across from me. The kids were at a neighbor's house. I've found a place, I said. I'll be out by the end of the month. Tiffany looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at me. Out of nowhere, he said. It's been coming for a while. Because of what I said on Thanksgiving. Because of what's been building for 3 years, I said. Thanksgiving just clarified things. So that's it, Tiffany said. You're just going to pull out of his family. I'm going to stop subsidizing a situation that isn't working for anyone. Those are your grandchildren, she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word, which was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since Thanksgiving. They are, I said, and I'll be 15 minutes away and I'll see them whenever they want to see their grandfather. That doesn't change. I looked at Marcus. Raymond Chu is going to be in touch about the mortgage. I want my name off that note by spring. You'll need to refinance. His jaw tightened. That's not that simple. I know. Raymond will help you understand your options. I pushed back my chair and stood up. Tiffany was looking at the table. Marcus was looking at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Anger. And underneath it, something that might have been shame, or might have been the beginning of understanding. I couldn't tell which yet. Maybe it didn't matter right now. I'm not doing this because I'm angry, I said, which wasn't entirely true, but was true enough. I'm doing this because I should have done it a long time ago. I went upstairs and finished packing the last of my things. Moving day was the first Saturday in December. I had hired movers, 2 young guys, efficient and cheerful, who made short work of the guest room. Brianna stood in the doorway watching them carry boxes and asked me if I was going on a trip. I told her no. I was going to my new house, and that she could come see it whenever she wanted, and we'd do puzzles there. I'd have a whole table set up just for puzzles. She thought about this for a moment, and seemed to find it acceptable. Marcus helped carry the last few boxes without being asked. We didn't speak much. When the truck was loaded, he stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets while I did a final check of the room. "Dad," he said when I came back out. I waited. He looked at the truck, then at the ground, then somewhere in between. I shouldn't have said what I said. It wasn't much. It was late and insufficient, and I had been waiting 3 weeks to hear something like it. But I looked at my son, 54 years old, standing in the driveway of a house I'd helped him buy, starting to understand something about the distance between what we take for granted and what we actually owe each other. And I thought about how Sandra used to say that people are mostly works in progress, and the only question is whether they're progressing. "No," I said. "You shouldn't have." I shook his hand, got in my car, followed the moving truck down the street, and turned left at the corner, and the house disappeared from my rearview mirror. The Apex house was everything Diane had promised. I spent the first week just moving through the rooms, getting used to their proportions, the way the light came through the kitchen windows in the afternoon, the particular sound the heat made in the old vents. I cooked real meals for myself every night, slept in a room that was mine, sat on the back deck in the cold December air with a cup of coffee, and watched the birds at the feeder I'd hummed the first morning. Marcus called 4 days after I moved out. Not about the mortgage. Raymond had already sent the letter, and that conversation was ongoing through attorneys. This was a different call. His voice was different, too, careful in a way that suggested he'd been working up to it. "The kids want to know if you're coming for Christmas," he said. "Brianna specifically has asked 4 times. "Tell Brianna I'll be there," I said. "And you? Are you okay?" I looked out at the backyard, at the frost on the grass, at the bird feeder swinging slightly in the wind. I thought about the cruise I hadn't taken, the $31,000 that had stayed in my account. I was now sitting in a high-yield savings that Paulette had suggested I open. I thought about the workshop in the garage that I'd already started organizing, a project I'd put off for years because there was always something more urgent somewhere else. I thought about Sandra and the way she would have looked at me right now if she were here, and I thought she would have looked the way she looked in that photograph, half smiling at something just out of frame, something only she could see clearly. "Yes," I said, "I'm okay." I meant it in a way I hadn't meant much of anything in a long time. The Christmas gathering at Marcus's house was the kids' territory, and so it was fine. Brianna dragged me immediately to the puzzle table, and we worked for 2 hours on a 500-piece woodland scene while the adults orbited around us in varying degrees of awkward effort. Tiffany was civil. Marcus was more than civil. Something had shifted in him, not completely and not irreversibly, but genuinely. People are works in progress. Driving home afterward, Apex dark and quiet, I'd passed the street where the farm stand sits. Closed for the season now. The sign for the heritage turkeys still up, but weathered. I thought about next Thanksgiving. Thought about the cornbread recipe. Thought about Paulette, who had already said she'd come for it. I had started looking at flights to Ireland. Not for any occasion. Not for anyone else. Just because Sandra and I had always said we'd go and we never had, and I was 67 years old with a paid-off car and a decent pension and a new house and more time than I knew what to do with. It seemed like the right moment to stop waiting for permission. I keep coming back to the cornbread. That's the detail that stays with me. Standing at Marcus's stove on Thanksgiving morning, making the recipes Sandra taught me, the one her mother taught her, and somewhere behind me my son was getting ready to say the word that would change everything. I didn't know it yet. I was just making cornbread. There's something about that image that tells the whole story if you look at it honestly. I had been showing up for years, cooking, watching the grandkids, mowing the lawn, signing my name on a mortgage, writing checks I never asked to be paid back. And I had told myself that was love, that giving without conditions was the right way to be a father. And maybe it was for a while. But somewhere along the line, what I thought was love had become something else. It had become a pattern where one person gives and another person takes, and both of them stop questioning whether the arrangement is actually good for either one. Marcus didn't become the man who called his father a leech overnight. I know that now. It happened incrementally, one unchallenged assumption at a time, one check written without a conversation, one boundary I declined to draw because I didn't want to make things uncomfortable. I'm not saying it was my fault he said what he said. It wasn't. What a grown man chooses to say to his father is his responsibility and no one else's. But I played a role in building a dynamic where he never had to reckon with what things actually cost. Not just money, but effort, dignity, time. When you never let people feel the weight of what they're receiving, you shouldn't be surprised when they stop seeing it as a gift. What changed things wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger would have burned itself out in a week, and I'd have ended up back in that guest room because guilt has a longer half-life than fury. What changed things was something quieter. It was sitting on the edge of that motel bed, except in my case it was sitting at Paulette's kitchen table in Durham. And finally being honest with myself about what I had been tolerating and why. That kind of honesty takes something. It takes being willing to look at your own choices without flinching, to understand which ones came from love and which ones came from fear of conflict, of loneliness, of being difficult. That's not easy work. Most people avoid it their whole lives because it's uncomfortable, and the discomfort doesn't promise anything on the other side. But I did it. And on the other side was a brick ranch in Apex with good light in the garage and a puzzle table set up for Brianna and a folder of flights to Ireland sitting on my kitchen counter. On the other side was a version of myself I recognized from a long time ago. Someone who made decisions, who held his ground without cruelty, who understood that taking care of yourself isn't the same as abandoning the people you love. Marcus is a work in progress. So am I. That's the thing about this kind of reckoning. It doesn't tie up cleanly. He's not a villain, and I'm not a saint. What we are is two people who got into a pattern that wasn't working and eventually had to break it, painfully at some cost to both of us, in order to find something more honest underneath. I don't know yet what we'll build from here, but I know I'm building it as myself, on my own ground, with my name finally off a mortgage that was never supposed to be mine in the first place. That's enough to start with.